responding to the call of discipleship, I would say is actually similar to falling in love. And lately I've actually begun using the word apprenticeship alongside discipleship, because discipleship really is just a word we use in religious contexts. We don't really use it anywhere else. So yeah, apprenticeship is something that kind of makes sense to us. It's kind of like, you apprentice yourself to somebody to learn their skill or their craft. And then you can become like them and do what they do. Maybe kind of like, being an intern or being an assistant in the lab and learning to do research well, stuff like that. So, and that's kind of what disciple means. It's a student or an apprentice of somebody in the day of Jesus. But thinking about it in the terms of like falling in love with Jesus. I mean, if you really respond to the call to be a disciple, to be an apprentice of Jesus, it's a total abandonment to the thing that you're pursuing. So when you really fall in love with someone, like other things just fall away, and your friends kind of get to be like, when are we ever going to see so and so again? Because they're just off after that new person. And so even if that person is great, sometimes your friends get annoyed with them because all your time is spent with that person or pursuing that person. You talk about them all the time, and it gets to be annoying. You fall in love with somebody, you start catching and cultivating new interests, priorities, and practices. You find yourself doing the things that they do just to be around them. And by doing that, some of the things that they like and they're interested in, you're like, oh, wow, yeah, I kind of like this, and I'm interested in this too. I didn't even know it. And other things you might intentionally begin to do to impress them. Like, hey, look, I do that too, because I want to be wherever you are. You might even redefine purpose, plans, and schedule. I was going to do this internship over here next summer, but I think I'm going to go do it on the other side of the country because that's where Boo lives. You will change your future plans when you are truly in love with somebody, and you just adopt new habits. You might even begin learning new language. Maybe that's a new dialect or new jargon, or that might straight up be a new language because their first language is not yours and you want to learn their language. So when it comes to following Jesus and the call to discipleship, it really looks like this. It looks like falling in love, and everything else becomes secondary to pursuing that love. Now, where am I at here? The role of the Christian leader or the disciple maker or apprentice maker. I would say that every faithful disciple or every faithful apprentice of Jesus is a leader, because you have adopted his priorities. And that involves spreading the message and walking in the way of Jesus, which is a life of service and bringing the kingdom into reality wherever you go. So as you walk, as you talk, the kingdom is being made real through your life, through how you choose to live and how you speak and how you treat other people. And honestly, you can't follow Jesus and not lead others at some level. You have influence in your life. Everybody has influence. And so what are you going to use that influence for? If Jesus is number one, then your influence will be used for him, even accidentally sometimes. It's just, you can't not influence people with what is most important to you. And part of following Jesus is spreading his message and spreading his kingdom. And so you take action on that. And so the role of the Christian leader, also though, the leader in the Jesus movement is the slave of all, putting the needs of others above yourself all the time. I mean, it's just the way of Jesus. He modeled it and he taught it over and over again. Last summer, we read it was just like a year and a half ago, I read all the Gospels like within a month. One week, bam, 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 bam. And kind of notice what are the things that are the same between them all, because John is pretty different than the other three. And one of the things that is the same through all of them is this idea that the leader is the slave of all. Like it's harped on by Jesus. It's part of the bedrock of his new movement. Is if you want to be a leader, if you want to be great, you lay down your preferences and serve other people. And so you put the needs of others above yourself, and the maturity of those around you, they're growing up into faith, becomes a higher priority even than your own desires. And honestly, I say the leader or disciple maker, is kind of like a parent whose life is no longer their own, but dedicated to the growth and care and provision of their children. Um, and so you might sometimes be harried and hassled and tired by the people you seek to lead, because your life in some sense belongs to them, in the same way that a mom's life doesn't belong to her. And a dad's life should as well. Jen is way better at this than me, because I'm still a little bit old school and I'm selfish. But Jen is an amazing mom. And she constantly is thinking about how everything that she does affects the whole family, and how, it's just like, I'm like, Jen, please stop, just sit down. Like, let's do something fun. She's like, I have to do this for the sake of our family. Like, oh, but can't we just not worry about the family right now? But that is her priority. And part of it is, she's a type A personality, but it's also, it's the responsibility inherent of, I'm a parent and I'm going to take care of these kids. And not that I don't do that too, but as Jen just does it to a whole nother level. And so also, while I said, I think every follower of Jesus is going to be a leader at some level, obviously the level of influence and authority is different for every disciple, and it changes throughout life. So sometimes you might lead a small group, and sometimes you might lead leaders of small groups, and sometimes you might just be a member of a small group who has influence on the people in your family, or you're reaching out to your neighbor. But you're always a person of influence for the kingdom. Because discipleship without leading or teaching others is honestly it's a contradiction. It's part of the deal as you follow Jesus. So I talked about this idea of mom. Family language is it's really present all throughout the New Testament. Like the new community of Jesus is a family. And the Apostle Paul really hits this in multiple roles of the family regarding his own leadership with the Thessalonians in chapter 2 of his first letter to them. He's talking about what his experience was like when he went there with Silas and Timothy to plant that church. The first time they heard the gospel and the first time they came together as a community that followed Jesus. And he says about that time, he says, we were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. So first he says we were like children. But then he says, just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you, because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil and hardship. We worked night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preached the gospel of God to you. You are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. So you really have all roles of a family here. He talks about being like a child in gentleness, like a mother in care. He calls them brothers and sisters as peers, walking together in the Lord. And he also says he was like a father to them, making sure that they had everything they needed. And like being, I don't know, dad's like the coach and mom's the provider or something. But anyways, the idea is his life was devoted to these people so that they could become who God wanted them to be. You see this, this continues in John chapter 21. Jesus is talking to Peter. He's restoring him back to being a part of the community of disciples. And he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter had denied him 3 times. So this was kind of an important question. Peter, do you love me? And he says, yes. So then he says, well, feed my lambs. Peter, do you love me? He's like, yes. Take care of my sheep. Peter, do you love me? It hurts when I ask you the 3rd time. Yes, you know that I love you, Lord. Feed my sheep. Following Jesus means taking care of those that he loves, taking care of those that he calls his own. Obviously, that varies. How many people are you feeding? How many people are you fighting for? How many people are you taking care of in the faith, depending upon your vocation and what your role is at that time in life. But all of us have this role to, as we like to say in Chi Alpha, find, feed, and fight for the lost lambs of God. That is what it means to follow Jesus. We don't follow Jesus just to be like, oh, I get to go to heaven when I die. Woo! It's about experiencing his kingdom life now and inviting everyone else that we possibly can into that. And that's a whole life. That's not just like service. So I think, well, anyways, going back to this idea of being in love, you adopt the loves of your beloved. So you could imagine maybe marrying someone who already has children. Got the step parent idea going on here. You could actually see your small group as your stepkids. Now, don't take this too far. This is just an analogy. But what kind of step parent will you be? Because as a step parent, you're not ultimately their parent, but much of what those kids will know of real parental love, it's going to come from you. And a lot of what they know about how to be a responsible adult is going to come from you. Like, you are not responsible for the people in your small group, but you're responsible to them, that they would begin to know what it looks like to have God in their life. And so you would minister the truth of Jesus and the love of God to them as this, well, sometimes church people use this idea of under shepherd. But you are a pastoral role. You're feeding the sheep. You're the step parent. You're not just, but it's not like you could take it too far. Anyways, I'm not going to try to explain it. Hopefully you guys are tracking with me a little bit on the idea of being a step parent, small group leader. You love the kids. You're not there to beat them or mistreat them. But then the end goal for our servant leadership is to see others presented to Christ as faithful apprentices or disciples themselves, which also entails that they become leaders of others. Just as our following Jesus entails leading others, those that we lead, their following Jesus will also entail following others. So just like a step parent wants those kids to grow up and be responsible adults so they can someday be parents or people who take care of responsibility. So a few examples of what that looks like in the Bible. First of all, you see this when Jesus first calls the disciples. He says, hey, follow me and I'll make you fishers of people. He's talking to fishermen, so the idea of fishing makes sense to them. But it doesn't say, follow me and I'll teach you to be good religious guys. It doesn't say, follow me and I'll teach you a lot of really cool things about God. Like, from the get-go, follow me and I will teach you how to get other people to be a part of the kingdom of God. Like, that was the point of following him. You see this in, and also then it says, I think in Mark chapter 3, he called them in order that he might send them. And then Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 6, when he receives his call, first thing he sees God and he's like, oh my gosh, he has this crazy experience with seeing God. And then the next thing that happens all of a sudden is he hears this voice, who will go for us? And he's like, hey, I'll go. As soon as he sees God, as soon as he has this encounter with God, he has this commissioning to go and carry God's message to the people. And you see this also with Saul, who becomes Paul. He meets Jesus on the road to Damascus and immediately is called to take the gospel to the Gentiles. Like, your calling is your commission when it comes to following Jesus. And then 2 Timothy 2:2, call equals commission. Look, I have a slide. 2 Timothy 2:2 is a great verse that just illustrates this idea well. So the Apostle Paul is writing to his protege, Timothy. So he says, hey, Tim, the things you heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, I want you to entrust those things to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. So Paul is following Jesus, and he's learned to follow Jesus with the help of Barnabas and some of the other apostles. And so he's passing this to Timothy, and Timothy's going to pass it on to some of the people in his church who are currently reliable so that they can pass it on to the next generation. So you have 4 generations of following Jesus present in this sentence. And that's what we want Chi Alpha to look like, that your small group could actually look like 4 generations of following Jesus. I first experienced this when I was a junior and senior in high school, right after I started following Jesus. And I met this guy named Tony Jones through a friend. Tony was a volunteer in the youth group. He worked a full-time job at a grocery store. He was like an executive or manager of some sort. He does like training for a grocery store chain now. But anyways, he would come on Wednesday nights and meet guys, and then he'd invite them into a discipleship group, basically. But the point of the group was not to just come together and have more Bible study, more prayer. It was actually a ministry. He called it Launching Pad Ministry. And our purpose was that we would come together and learn a little bit. But then when we went to church, and we had a lot of church because our church was in this like revival experience, and it was wild and emotional and powerful. It was crazy. We'd go to church for 5 hours every Friday night, literally. And we loved it. But anyways, so on a Friday night or a Sunday night service or Sunday morning, we would look for other teenage boys who may not yet be connected to the community of the youth group. And we'd seek to connect them into the community, either to ourselves or to somebody else in our group, that they could come into the community and then they themselves would be able to be turned into one of us. But they would also then be someone who connects others into the community, that they might grow and bring others in, that they might grow. I didn't know what Tony was teaching us. I didn't know I was being taught how to be a disciple maker. But that's where I first began to see what this looks like. And it was really awesome, because it wasn't just about me and getting to be quote unquote more holy. It was about the purposes of Jesus in the world. So the thing is, if God's heart beats for the harassed and helpless lost sheep of the world, how can we who claim to walk in his love ignore their need? It's on us to follow through on what God loves. The Bible tells us that we're no longer our own, but we belong to Jesus and we belong to the Father. Our lives, our time, our preferences, it's not our own anymore. We lay that down because Jesus is the King. We're called to lay aside everything, even including our rights, in order to follow and lead. And the Apostle Paul talks about this. I'm going to skip this verse for a second. In 1 Corinthians 9, it's a really great chapter, and he says a whole bunch of stuff. He talks about how, as a leader, he has rights. He could get paid for his work, but he gives all those things up for the sake of those that he's leading and seeking to teach the way of Jesus to, so that they could see Christ without distraction. So the leader lays down her preferences in order to identify with and be near those she wants to be near. So he talks about, like, when he goes to Gentiles, he kind of to a certain extent lays aside his Jewish identity so that he can draw nearer to the Gentiles so they might listen to him well. And when he's with Jewish people, he will adopt a more strict attitude towards some of the things that he's been free about, so that he might draw more near to them and be able to bring Jesus to them without being distracting. Because it's about the people he's reaching. It's not about himself. And then in verses 19 and 23, you can see there, he says, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible." Again, it's this idea of you lay down your rights and your preferences. "I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." This is really interesting. He talks about, he does it for everyone else, but then he also does it in a sense for himself, because the gospel is this news that you lay down your life for others. So if you want to live in the gospel, you actually have to lay down your life for others. That's what the good news does, is it liberates us to live for more than ourselves. Hebrews chapter 12 just talks about how we need, like, anything that might possibly hinder us from running full steam after Christ and everything that he values, we just got to throw off. It's a beautiful passage. "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," and this would be all the people who've ever been faithful to God throughout all of human history, somehow they're like our cloud of witnesses saying, "You can do it, Chelsea. You can do it, Hunter." Like, they're cheering for us as we serve Jesus. So he says, "Because of this, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles." And so I don't know, maybe Hunter and Annika as track runners can realize, like, you don't want to have anything on you that might hinder you or trip you up as you are trying to race. That would be bad. "So let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." And so as we follow Jesus to lead others, we have to throw off everything and be like Jesus. Most likely, we're not going to find ourselves physically on a cross, suffering that kind of a fate. The idea is you pick up your cross to follow Jesus. And I think part of that cross is, I'm fully convinced, part of that cross is laying down our lives so that others would know what we have come to know in the grace of God. So this gets to this question: what hinders us from living like true disciples and true lovers of Jesus. And ultimately, it really comes down to self. Why are we afraid to evangelize, to announce the good news and share what God has done and is doing in our lives? Why are we afraid to invite new people in the community that is seeking Christ? We're afraid of what people think about us or how they'll respond to us. It's our self. Why do we avoid reaching out, making new friends, incorporating others into our busy lives, or serving our friends? Why are we so busy in the first place? And it's ourselves. Why do we decline to step up and lead? Leading usually means serving. And honestly, it's usually self. I'm not good enough. I don't have enough time. I won't succeed. It's I. I am in the way. Why are we afraid to challenge someone else to step up and die to themselves to lead? Self. We're afraid that they're going to think we're being demanding or whatever it might be. And I'm not trying to say, you guys are bad. These are all things that I still feel, even though I've been doing this even as a job for a long time. It's self rises up and wants to get in the way of following the way of Jesus. And that's why we die to ourselves. So ultimately we get to this point of asking, what's more important? Is it our sense of self, or is it Jesus Christ? Jesus said, whoever has been forgiven much loves much. Have we really experienced that full forgiveness? Or have we forgotten where he's brought us from? Or maybe are we kind of living in denial of what he really has forgiven us of? Because grace motivates us to use our lives to celebrate the one who gave us grace in the first place. We want to give it all, to lay it all down for the one who loved us well. To follow Jesus well is to be in love. And this isn't no longer an analogy, like we are in love with him. He is the source, he's the object of our deepest affection. He's the object of our deepest desire. So we set aside our preferences, all of our preconceived plans and dreams for him. That includes our dream jobs and our dream dates and I don't know, whatever other dreams you may have. There are lots of other dreams to have. They're just not coming to mind at the moment. And we agree with him that the kingdom of God is the most important reality in all existence at all times, in all places, in every vocation and every nation. So we put on love, or in the old King James it was translated charity, which is actually a good translation because it gets this idea of giving away. We put on love and kindness, patience and compassion while taking off the old self. This comes from Colossians chapter 3. And so I didn't come up with this term, but I really like this term of unselfing. We take off the old garments of self and we put on the new garments of Jesus and his way. And so if we want to be a part of his movement of making disciples and leading like Jesus, it can't be about us. It really can't, because it will be fun sometimes and it will be hard sometimes. And sometimes it'll just be boring because you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again to a certain extent. But it's not about us. It's about him. If we're going to reach this world that is sick with sin, we have to die to ourselves. And honestly, I would say, not only is it fun to be a part of seeing other people begin to follow Jesus, when you truly start living this way, which I believe most of you probably have at some level, when you begin to lay yourself aside, that's when you're truly alive. That's when the reality of Jesus becomes real. Reality becomes real. Look at that. That was a very clever saying. I hope you got that one. But when we're stuck on ourselves, we miss out on the most important things. And usually, if you look back on your life, the memories that are most impactful are the memories where you really weren't thinking much about yourself. You were just in the moment. You were serving somebody. You were giving your heart to somebody, and you were fully alive. When we try to protect ourselves, there's just a sense of not being fully there. You're not fully present because you're thinking about yourself rather than about what's happening. And so that's the way, not only of making disciples, it's the way of being a disciple. And the two go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other.